haven't seen that. We've been approached by the odd industrial producer of products that have wanted to sign long-term agreements with us, and we've always turned it down. We want to be spot and sell at spot. Our investors who buy First Majestic want to have that exposure to the metal, so it doesn't make any sense for us to try to trade the metal. We take the risk, and our shareholders who buy our stock also take the same metal risk that we take. The margins today are great, of course, and we have more cash in the bank today than we ever have had in the history of the company. Our balance sheet is very, very nice looking, and we have our Q2 production numbers coming out tomorrow. I would suggest people have a look at that. You did touch on the mint. You want me to cover that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so the mint, we've been selling retail products, like this. This is a 1 kilo, bar that we produce. This is our own production. This metal comes from Mexico. It goes into a refinery, then it goes into our mint in Nevada, where we produce these products. And we have a website, firstmint.com, and people are welcome to go to it. But we decided to do our own mint because we were being bottlenecked by the current, mints out there. They just couldn't supply us with the product, and we were selling retail products similar to this since 2008. And 2 years ago, I just got very frustrated and said, let's do this ourselves. It took some time. We had to hire all new people, and we're a mining company. We're not a minting company. So there's a bit of a learning curve there. We had to find a location and all those types of things and get a staffing in place, follow the equipment. And we launched in March of 2024. We've had great couple of quarters. Sales are coming in. We're making a little bit of extra margin on our ounces that we're selling. In Q1, I don't know what the Q2 numbers are yet, but the Q1 numbers, we just 7% of our total silver production went through the mint. In last year was 5%. Our goal is to get 10% of our total production through that mint on an annual basis. Yeah, we're selling all our small legacy assets that we had in the portfolio back in the early 2000s, and we've sold a couple already. We get big chunky shareholder positions in juniors that are wanting to develop these assets that were once our cornerstone assets. But as we got bigger as a business, it didn't make sense for us to have a bunch of 1 million ounce or 2 million ounce producers in our portfolio. So we started to buy bigger assets and develop bigger assets, and now we've got 3 cornerstone assets in our portfolio. All are 10 million ounce producers. All have mine lives of 8 to 10 years, plus, of course, exploration upside on top of that. So we're in a very good position. But on the M&A front, you had Coeur take out, Silvercrest and Mag, or Pan American take out Mag. There's very few left. You look at the North American silver space, Pan American's number 1, Coeur's 2, First Majestic's number 3, and we're very close behind. We would love to be number 1. How to get there is a challenge. Well, the junior space is always the last to go. So, we saw the producers, led by Newmont and others, the majors, start to perform quite nicely, and Ecos and so on. And then it's now come to, the mid-tiers, our level. Our stock is up about 30%, as you said, year to date. It's still super cheap as far as I'm concerned, but the money is coming in. And now you're seeing bids coming into the exploration space, which is really good to see. I own some personally. I own a couple of names. First Majestic owns a couple positions and some juniors as well. So we monitor the space, very closely. But for us, as First Majestic, as a major silver producer, it doesn't do us any good, as I said earlier, that we're going to just go buy a bunch of exploration companies because you've got permitted. I remember I saw a presentation by a CEO just about a year ago. It takes about 18 years from discovery to production. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of risk. So you've got a lot of money, a lot of shareholders that have put money in, long-term investors. It's a very tough industry to get to a producing state. And so, we don't, for us, we don't want to buy an unpermitted asset. We just don't want to take that risk. I'm the chairman of First Mining Gold, and we bought, one of the largest gold projects in Canada, in Northern Ontario, back in 2015, and now we're at 2025, and we spent $100 million in the last 10 years trying to get that permitted. And it's now looking like we're going to get it in the next couple of years.
Starting to have
the government's starting to support it. The local indigenous groups are now starting to support it. So we're hoping to actually break ground on a brand new mine. It'll be one of the cornerstone mines in Ontario once it's up and running. But it's the lights at the end of the tunnel. That's First Mining Gold. Right. But my point is, it just takes so long. That discovery was made, or the first 43-101 on that asset was in 2010. And now we're 15 years later, and we're still probably 1 or 2 years away from final permit. So there's your 17 years. Yeah. When I put together First Mining Gold, for example, we bought all the assets we bought for that company was all Canadian-based assets. When I put First Majestic together, it was all Mexican-based assets. I look at these jurisdictions as tier 1 mining-friendly jurisdictions. So I'm not worried about Mexico. Mexico's going in the right direction. The previous administration, wasn't really a fond of foreign investment. The current administration is much more open to foreign investment, which we're obviously happy about. But United States, parts of the U.S., Australia, parts of Europe, these are places that you really need to focus on. Land tenure, permittability is very key, and that's a big deal. We haven't seen $35 silver for 15 years, and silver's only been over $30 3 times in our lifetime. So at these kinds of prices, it's a good place to be as a silver miner. But still, we need higher prices to make the additional investments to increase our production. And when you have 5-year deficits in a row now, there's a lot of silver coming out of vaults, going into industry, going into technology, going into solar panels, going into electric cars, and your average household appliance, or your cell phone, or whatever the case may be, and that's not going to go away. You're seeing the planet being electrified and upgraded, and there's lots of people in the world that need electricity, need all the gadgets we have. So there's going to be a ton of demand still coming over the next several decades for zinc, copper, silver. Those are the three metals I'd be most interested in as an investor.
Interesting.
Well, as I said earlier, when last time silver was at $35, our stock was $25. Right. So I think, and we were half the size of the company back then. So what does that say to where we're at in the space? I think we're still very early. Our shares, basically flatlined for the last 2 years. Yeah. And it's only in the last 6 months that our stock has actually started to move, and the others as well. We're not the only one. And now the money's starting to trickle into the smaller companies, which is great. But, we need a good, solid 10-year bull market. An 02 to 2012 was a beautiful, fun time for the mining sector. And I think we're going to see that again. I think we're in the early stages of another 10-year. Our Q2 production numbers are coming out tomorrow. Maybe this interview will be after that comes out, but nevertheless, it will be tomorrow as of today. And I would suggest people have a look at that. But our balance sheet is at the strongest it's ever been. And the cash position is wonderful to see. As a CEO running this company for 22 years and looking at our cash balance. I was listening to a podcast just this morning, and they were thinking $4,100 gold and $41 silver by the end of the year. So we'll see. It's a bit of a guessing. They're the number one silver producer, and if you want to be a silver company, as far as I'm concerned, you've got to be in Mexico. We know the space likely better than anyone. We have a team of M&A, our M&A group internally, and we're always watching news releases. We're always measuring what's going on out there. We have our eyeballs on stuff, but as I said earlier, we need to get a good chunky asset with hopefully permits in place and a runway to production. Gold always runs first, which we saw this time around, and the bid is coming into silver. I think the supply-demand fundamentals of the metal are extraordinary right now. We still are in deficits. We're in our 5th year of deficits now. I think the big investors out there are starting to look at silver. We're getting more inquiries today from big funds, big investors, looking at how they should position themselves in the silver space. And, as you know, the M&A activity that's been going on in the silver space is getting smaller and smaller. So First Majestic's in a very unique position, and we're looking forward to, of course, higher metal prices. But the stock, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about it, but the stocks are still lagging. I don't know. It's a tough. I've been in this market for 40 years, and I've seen many bull markets in the mining space, and there's almost a bit of a love-hate relationship. And it is an extractive industry, so there are investors out there that just simply won't play oil and gas or metals or mining. They focus their investments on high tech or industrial stocks or pharmaceuticals and so on, the more normal type of Main Street types of investments. So the mining sector tends to be a bit of a niche, and it is a very small market. The entire silver market is $30 billion. So when you have these small markets and niche-like markets, it takes a while for these institutions to wake up and say, hey, look, it's time to start coming into this market. And last time silver was at these prices, our stock was $25 a share. We got a long ways to go. And also at that time, we were producing half of what we're producing today. We think so. We're definitely getting a lot more meetings. They're saying the right things. We travel constantly, as you probably likely know, meeting all the funds around the world. And the interest levels are at the highest level I've seen probably since, 10 years, I would think. And these are big generalist funds. These aren't your hedge funds or your specialist type funds. These are actually generalists that are looking at the silver space and, of course, the gold space as well. But the money is coming in for sure. A challenge, right? The mining sector is very complex. There's always inflation. Your biggest cost is labor. So in this tight labor environment, it's hard to find really good, high quality engineers and geologists. So, mining companies have to pay up for these individuals, and there's competition out there for these types of individuals as well. To hire, a workforce of 300 or 400 people that are in the mine working on a daily basis isn't really that difficult. In Mexico, particularly, it's a very seasoned mining industry or mining country. So getting good quality staff at the mining level is actually pretty easy, but getting the high level, high quality staff. So you've always got inflation there. And of course, chemical costs and tires and equipment, machinery, construction costs, all those types of things are more expensive. When I put First Majestic together, silver was $7 an ounce 22 years ago. When silver went from $10, we were partying it up. But our costs back then were less than $10. Our costs today are about $19 around on an all-in sustaining basis. So we're making money now at these current prices, of course. But
and down to 30.
Right, we could potentially, hopefully not, but we could. But it just shows you over the 22-year history of the company, our costs have doubled over that period of time. Yeah, it's going to come down to grade, right? Because the only way to produce more silver in the current environment, because there's nothing big that's coming online in the next couple of years. There's been no major discoveries. There's assets out there that look good on paper, good chunky assets, but they're all quite low-grade assets. So in order to make those assets economic and make the company that's owning those assets to make the necessary investment, in the hundreds of millions of dollars to bring these lower-grade operations up and running to add to the silver supply, you need triple-digit silver. Because even though we like $35 silver, it's still not enough to justify the big investments that are required to come into the space.